The moment the words left his mouth, the entire ballroom seemed to freeze in time. There I stood in my white gown, the one I had spent months dreaming about, the fabric clinging to every curve I had once hated, and then slowly learned to accept, when my fiancé turned to his circle of laughing friends and said, loud enough for half the room to hear, that I looked like a stuffed sausage trying to pass as a bride. The crystal chandeliers above us caught the light and threw it across the polished floor like broken stars, and for one suspended second, I could hear nothing but the blood rushing in my ears and the soft, collective intake of breath from the guests who had just realized the man I was about to marry had chosen cruelty over love on the most important day of our lives. If you believe in kindness and second chances, and in the quiet strength it takes to walk away from someone who is never worthy of you, please take a second right now to like this video, leave a comment from the heart, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support keeps stories like this alive. I had always been the girl who apologized for taking up space. Growing up, the mirror was never a friend. My mother meant well when she reminded me to suck in my stomach before photographs, and my father joked that I had inherited the family's generous build. By the time I reached high school, I had already learned to laugh first, so no one else could. College was no different. I studied harder, worked longer hours at the campus coffee shop, and kept my head down whenever groups of slender girls floated past. Then, I met him. It was a rainy Thursday in October when Daniel walked into that coffee shop with his laptop under one arm and a crooked smile that somehow made the gray day feel warmer. He ordered a black coffee, lingered at the counter longer than necessary, and asked if I had any recommendations for a quiet place to study nearby. I pointed him toward the corner table by the window. The next day he came back. The day after that, he brought me a single yellow daisy he claimed had fallen out of nowhere onto the sidewalk. Looking back, I can see how carefully he built the story of us, how he praised the things I was most insecure about until those insecurities felt almost beautiful under his attention. He told me my soft stomach was the place he wanted to rest his head after long days. He said my full thighs were the perfect shape for his hands. For the first time in my life, someone made me feel desired exactly as I was, and I believed him with every piece of my cautious heart. We dated for 3 years. I met his parents, who were polite but distant. I met his friends, a loud group of men who measured worth in bank accounts and gym memberships. Daniel always defended me when their jokes edged too close. Or at least I thought he did. He would squeeze my hand under the table and later whisper that they were just being guys, that I shouldn't take it personally. I wanted so badly to belong that I swallowed the discomfort and smiled. When he proposed on a beach at sunset, dropping to one knee with a ring that caught the last light of the day, I said yes through tears of pure relief. Finally, I thought, someone had chosen me forever. The engagement period was a blur of seating charts and cake tastings. My body became a quiet battlefield. Again, bridal magazines showed women with collarbones, sharp enough to cut glass. Fitting after fitting left me standing in front of three-way mirrors, while the seamstress pinned and tugged and gently suggested shapewear. Daniel would come to the appointments sometimes, sit in the little velvet chair, and tell me I looked perfect. Yet there were nights when he stayed out late with the same friends, returning with the smell of whiskey and a restless energy I couldn't name. Once I overheard him on the phone laughing about how his future wife could eat an entire pizza and still have room for dessert. The word stabbed, but when I asked about it, he kissed my forehead and said it was a compliment, that he loved how real I was compared to the girls who only ordered salads. I convinced myself that love meant overlooking the small cuts. I threw myself into planning a wedding that would prove we were happy. The venue was a restored manor house with gardens that spilled roses over stone walls. I chose soft ivory flowers and candlelight because harsh lights always made me feel exposed. My mother helped me into the dress on the morning of the ceremony, her hands careful as she fastened the tiny buttons up my back. She told me I was beautiful. I almost believed her. The ceremony itself passed in a haze of vows and rings, and the soft pressure of Daniel's lips against mine. Guests rose and applauded. We walked down the aisle hand in hand while a string quartet played something sweet and familiar. Then came the reception. Tables glittered under low light. Champagne glasses chimed. I floated from group to group accepting hugs and congratulations, my smile fixed and bright. Somewhere near the dessert table, Daniel gathered with his closest friends. I was only a few steps away when one of them clapped him on the shoulder and asked how it felt to be a married man. That was when Daniel turned, looked straight at me, and delivered the line that shattered everything. He said it with a grin, as if it were the funniest observation in the world. The friends erupted in laughter. One of them raised his glass in a mock toast. Another made a crude gesture with his hands, outlining an exaggerated shape in the air. Guests nearby fell silent. My mother's face went white. The photographer, who had been capturing candid moments all evening, lowered his camera, as if the lens itself had become too heavy. In that instant, every kind word Daniel had ever spoken rearranged itself into something hollow. The yellow daisy, the beach proposal, the late-night reassurances, all of it collapsed under the weight of that single public cruelty. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, then drain away until my skin felt cold. My hands began to tremble so hard the champagne flute I was holding threatened to slip. I set it down carefully on the nearest table. The room had not yet fully grasped what was happening. Some people were still smiling, waiting for the punchline that never came. Others had already begun to understand. I walked toward him. The silk of my gown whispered against the floor. Every step felt both endless and too short. When I reached the circle of men, I did not raise my voice. I simply looked at the man who had promised to love and honor me, and said that the wedding was over. The words left my mouth with a calm I did not recognize as my own. Daniel's smile faltered. One of his friends tried to laugh it off, calling me too sensitive. I turned to the entire room then, the guests who had traveled and spent and celebrated, and told them there would be no reception, no first dance, no cake cutting. I asked them to leave with whatever kindness they could still offer, and I thanked them for coming. The silence that followed was deeper than any music could have filled. My mother reached me first. She wrapped her arms around me without a single question. My father, usually a quiet man, stepped between Daniel and me with a look that needed no translation. Within minutes, the elegant ballroom began to empty. Guests collected their coats in stunned pairs. The catering staff hovered uncertainly near the kitchen doors. Daniel tried to speak, tried to claim it had only been a joke, that I was overreacting on our wedding day of all days. I did not answer him. I simply walked out into the cool night air, still wearing the dress that no longer felt like a promise. The weeks that followed were a landscape of raw edges. I returned the gifts. I canceled the honeymoon flights and the hotel reservations. I moved my belongings out of the apartment we had shared and into a small studio above a bookstore that smelled of paper and rain. At night, I would stand in front of the narrow mirror and study the body Daniel had mocked. The soft stomach, the full hips, the thighs that brushed together when I walked. I looked at them the way one looks at a landscape after a storm, searching for damage and finding instead a strange, stubborn endurance. Grief came in waves. Some mornings I could barely get out of bed. Other days anger arrived sharp and clarifying, reminding me that I had almost bound my life to a man who found entertainment in my humiliation. Friends checked in with casseroles and quiet presents. My mother sat with me on the tiny couch and listened without offering easy fixes. One evening, she told me the story of how her own mother had once been told she was too plain to marry well, and how she had built a life of fierce tenderness anyway. The parallel was not lost on me. I began to walk in the early mornings before the city fully woke, letting the rhythm of my footsteps settle the chaos inside. I returned to the coffee shop where everything had started, not to relive the past, but to reclaim the version of myself who had once believed she was enough. Slowly, the pieces of a new life assembled themselves. I took a promotion at work that required late nights and early presentations, and I discovered I was good at leading teams without apologizing for the space I occupied. I joined a community yoga class held in a converted warehouse with high windows and no mirrors. The instructor spoke about bodies as instruments of experience rather than objects of judgment, and for the first time I moved without constantly measuring myself against an invisible standard. On weekends, I volunteered at a local animal shelter, walking dogs whose uncomplicated affection required nothing from me except presence. One of them, a scruffy terrier mix with one floppy ear, ended up coming home with me. He slept at the foot of my bed and reminded me daily that love could be simple and without condition. Months passed. Seasons changed. I stopped checking Daniel's social media. I learned that he had tried to spin the story among mutual acquaintances, claiming I had ruined a perfect day over a harmless joke. The people who mattered already knew the truth. One afternoon, an old college friend invited me to a small gathering at her apartment. There I met a man named Elias who listened more than he spoke, and who never once commented on anyone's appearance in the hours we spent talking about books and travel, and the strange courage it takes to start over. When he asked me out for coffee a week later, I said yes without the old familiar flutter of needing to be chosen. I simply wanted to continue the conversation. Our relationship grew at a pace that felt honest. Elias never promised I was perfect. Instead, he treated me as a whole person whose body was simply the place where my life happened. On the anniversary of the wedding that never was, I took myself out to dinner alone. I ordered the dessert I actually wanted. I wore a dress that fit the way my body was that day, not the way I wished it would be. Sitting at the small table by the window, I realized the deepest freedom had arrived, not when someone else finally approved of me, but when I stopped requiring that approval in order to stay. Looking back now, I understand that the public humiliation was only the visible tip of something that had been eroding for years. Every small joke I had absorbed, every insecurity I had allowed him to soothe only so he could later exploit it, had prepared the ground for that final collapse. Ending the wedding was not an act of drama. It was the first clear boundary I had ever drawn around my own worth. The life that followed was quieter, more ordinary, and infinitely more real. I still carry the memory of that night in the ballroom, the sound of laughter that was not kind, the way the chandelier light fractured across the floor. But the memory no longer owns me. It simply reminds me of the moment I chose myself. If this story has touched something inside you, if it has reminded you of your own quiet battles or the strength it takes to walk away from what diminishes you, please let me know in the comments. Tell me what part stayed with you. Share it with someone who might need the reminder that they are allowed to leave the table when the meal is poisoned. Like the video, subscribe to Kindness Corner if you have not already, and help these stories reach the people who are still standing in their own difficult moments, wondering whether they deserve better. Just before I close, I have one special request. If you have ever stood at a crossroads between staying small for someone else's comfort and expanding into your own truth, leave a single word in the comments that describes how it felt to choose yourself. Your word might be the exact light another viewer needs tonight. The dress still hangs in the back of my closet, not as a relic of failure, but as proof that I once stood in the middle of a room full of people and decided my dignity mattered more than the spectacle. Some nights when the city is quiet, I take it out and run my fingers along the seams. The fabric is soft. It no longer feels like a costume I failed to wear correctly. It feels like the last thing I ever needed to prove. Outside my window, the terrier mix is already asleep on the couch. One ear flopped over his eyes. Tomorrow I will walk him at dawn, and the morning will arrive the way mornings always do, indifferent to yesterday's heartbreaks and full of the ordinary possibility of beginning again. I am no longer waiting for anyone to tell me I am enough. I already know, and that knowledge, hard-won and quiet, is the only vow I plan to keep for the rest of my life.